The warm spring evening buzzed with excitement at the downtown arts gallery. Thomas Henderson stood nervously in the corner, his hands fidgeting with the worn name tag that marked him as one of the featured artists. At 32 years old, this was his first real chance to showcase his paintings in a respected gallery, even if it was just a charity event. Thomas watched as wealthy art collectors moved from piece to piece, their expensive clothes and confident manner making him feel out of place in his thrift store blazer. He had grown up in a middle-class family on the outskirts of the city, and places like this still felt foreign to him. His mother had always encouraged his art, but his father wanted him to pursue a real job. Advice he was starting to think might have been wise, given his empty bank account. It was then that he noticed her. Amara Washington entered the gallery like a breath of fresh air, her bright yellow dress standing out among the sea of black and gray formal wear. She moved with confidence, her curves draped elegantly in the designer dress that Thomas could tell cost more than his monthly rent. Her natural hair was styled in elegant braids, and her smile lit up the room as she greeted various guests. Thomas knew who she was. Everyone in the city's business world did. At just 30 years old, Amara had already made a name for herself as one of the youngest investment bankers at Morgan Stanley. Her father, James Washington, was a prominent business tycoon who owned half the commercial real estate downtown. What happened next changed Thomas's life forever. Amara stopped in front of his largest painting, a scene of children playing in the rain in a poor neighborhood, their joy evident despite their circumstances. She stood there for several minutes, studying every detail. The artist really captured their spirits, Amara said to her friend, unaware that Thomas was standing nearby. Look at how the light reflects off the puddles, how the children's faces show pure happiness despite the rain. This is real life, not just another pretty picture. Thomas's heart raced. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. Thank you, he said softly. I'm Thomas Henderson. I painted that. Amara turned, her brown eyes widening with interest. Mr. Henderson, your work is incredible. The way you capture emotion in your subjects, it's exactly what's missing in most modern art. They talked for over an hour, losing track of time. Thomas found himself opening up about his struggles as an artist, his dreams of making it big enough to help his parents retire, and his frustration with the commercial art world. To his surprise, Amara listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences with the pressures of family expectations. You know, she said, checking her phone and realizing how late it had gotten, there's an amazing little coffee shop around the corner. They stay open late, and they display local artists' work. Would you like to continue our conversation there? Thomas hesitated for a moment. He was aware of the looks they were getting. A struggling artist and one of the city's most eligible wealthy women. Some people were already whispering and pointing, but something in Amara's genuine interest in his work, and the way she spoke about art with such passion, made him push aside his insecurities. I'd like that very much, he replied. As they walked to the coffee shop, Thomas realized this wasn't just about networking or selling his art. There was a connection here, something real and unexpected. Amara talked about her love of photography, her secret dream of opening an art school for underprivileged kids, and how tired she was of people seeing only her family's money when they looked at her. That night, over cups of coffee that grew cold because they were too busy talking, Thomas and Amara discovered they had more in common than anyone would have guessed. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the beginning of a love story that would challenge their assumptions, defy expectations, and ultimately test their understanding of what really matters in life. As the coffee shop owner finally had to ask them to leave at closing time, Amara gave Thomas her business card. Call me, she said with a smile. I'd love to hear more about your art. And maybe about you too. Thomas walked home that night, the business card carefully tucked in his wallet, feeling like his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. 3 days passed before Thomas finally gathered the courage to call Amara. His hand shook as he dialed her number, expecting to reach a secretary or voicemail. Instead, Amara answered on the second ring, her voice warm and excited. I was wondering when you'd call, she said, making Thomas smile. They planned to meet that weekend at a small park where local artists often set up their easels. Saturday morning found Thomas arriving early, his old sketchbook tucked under his arm. He watched as Amara's sleek black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, drawing attention from passers-by. But when she stepped out wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt, carrying a camera around her neck, Thomas felt his nervousness fade away. "I hope you don't mind if I take some photos while you sketch," she said, showing him her expensive camera. "I love capturing real moments." They spent the morning together, Thomas drawing the scenery while Amara photographed everything from playing children to elderly couples on benches. They talked about their families, their dreams, and their fears. Thomas learned that despite her wealth, Amara felt lonely in her world of high finance and social obligations. "Everyone wants something from me," she confessed, sitting beside him on a park bench. "But you're different, Thomas. You see me, not my father's money." Their first kiss happened naturally, under a large oak tree as the sun was setting. Neither of them planned it, but both knew it felt right. Over the next few months, their relationship grew stronger. Thomas introduced Amara to his favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants, where the food was amazing, but the atmosphere was humble. Amara showed him her world too, taking him to art galleries and charity events where his talent began to get noticed. Not everyone supported their relationship. Thomas's best friend, Mike, made thoughtless comments about Amara's weight and suggested Thomas was just after her money. Thomas ended up punching him at a bar one night, defending Amara's honor. "I don't care what anyone thinks," Thomas told her later, holding an ice pack to his bruised knuckles. "You're the most beautiful, kind, and intelligent woman I've ever met." Amara had her own challenges. Her colleagues at the bank raised their eyebrows at her dating a starving artist. Some even suggested she was lowering her standards. But Amara stood firm, prouder of Thomas's honest passion for art than any wealthy suitor's business achievements. Their different backgrounds sometimes created funny moments. Like when Thomas tried to order wine at an expensive restaurant Amara chose for their 3-month anniversary and accidentally selected a bottle that cost more than his monthly rent. Amara saw his panic and squeezed his hand under the table, later telling him she loved him for caring about such things rather than carelessly spending like her usual social circle. 6 months into their relationship, they had their first big fight. Thomas felt insecure about Amara always paying for expensive dates and tried to refuse her offer to help him rent a proper art studio. "Why won't you let me help?" she asked, hurt evident in her voice. "You take this offer from any other investor who believed in your talent." "Because I love you," Thomas exploded. "And I don't want anyone thinking I'm with you for your money." The argument ended with both of them realizing how much they meant to each other. They agreed to be more open about their fears and insecurities, and to find a balance that made them both comfortable. That night, curled up on Thomas's worn couch in his small apartment, Amara looked around at his paintings covering every wall and said, "I feel more at home here than I ever have in my father's mansion." Thomas pulled her closer and whispered, "Then move in with me." Amara's answer was to kiss him, both of them knowing they were choosing a path that would challenge them, but feeling ready to face anything together. As they fell asleep that night, Thomas realized that true love didn't care about bank accounts or social status, it only cared about the connection between two hearts. Neither of them could have guessed that their biggest challenges still lay ahead, or that their love would soon be tested in ways they never imagined. Moving in together was just the beginning of Thomas and Amara's challenges. The real test came when it was time to meet each other's families. Thomas's parents lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, where his mother still used the same furniture from 20 years ago. On the day Amara was supposed to visit, Thomas's mother Sarah spent hours cleaning and cooking, worried about impressing someone from such a wealthy background. His father Robert paced nervously, adjusting his only tie repeatedly. "Just remember to be yourself," Thomas told them. "That's why Amara loves me, because I'm real with her." When Amara arrived, she brought homemade cookies she had baked herself, though they were slightly burned. This small imperfection instantly made Sarah relax. During dinner, Amara helped clear the dishes and insisted on washing them, sharing stories about her own grandmother's cooking lessons. But Robert couldn't stay quiet anymore. Over coffee in the living room, he finally spoke up. "Look, Miss Washington, I have to ask. What are your real intentions with my son?" "Dad." Thomas started to object, but Amara touched his arm gently. "Mr. Henderson," she said firmly, "I love your son because he sees me as Amara, not as James Washington's daughter. When I'm with him, I don't have to pretend to be perfect. I can just be myself." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, but Robert wasn't completely convinced. Later that night, he pulled Thomas aside. Son, I worry. What happens when she gets tired of playing house with a poor artist? You could get your heart broken. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. Dad, if you can't accept her, you'll lose me too. She's not playing at anything. She's the most genuine person I know. Meeting Amaro's family proved even more challenging. Their mansion was bigger than Thomas's entire apartment building. James Washington, Amaro's father, stood at the top of the grand staircase like a king surveying his kingdom. Her mother Victoria sat perfectly poised on an antique sofa, her expression unreadable. So, Mr. Henderson, James began, not even offering Thomas a seat, I understand you make your living. Painting pictures? Thomas straightened his spine. Yes, sir, I'm an artist. My work was recently featured in the Downtown Arts Gallery. Ah, yes, that little charity event, Victoria commented, making the word charity sound like something dirty. Amara squeezed Thomas's hand. Mother, Thomas's painting sold for more than any other piece that night. He's talented, and he's making a name for himself. James laughed coldly. A name? My dear, do you know how many struggling artists there are in this city? How will he provide for you? For children? Daddy, I make my own money. Amara shot back. I don't need anyone to provide for me. The tension in the room grew thick. Thomas watched as Amara's parents exchanged worried looks, probably thinking about their country club friends' reactions. Sir, Thomas finally spoke up, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I may not have your wealth or status, but I love your daughter for who she is, not what she has. I'll spend my life making her happy, even if I have to paint 1,000 pictures to do it. There was a long silence. Then, surprisingly, Victoria smiled slightly. Well, at least he has backbone. That's more than I can say for those trust fund boys you usually date, dear. James Washington still looked unconvinced, but he nodded slowly. Time will tell, young man, time will tell. Later that night, back in their small apartment, Amara cried in Thomas's arms. I'm sorry about my parents. They can be so. Hey, Thomas wiped her tears. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we're in this together, right? Amara looked up at him, her eyes full of love and determination. Together, no matter what anyone says. What they didn't know was that both families were right to worry, but for all the wrong reasons. The real challenge to their love wouldn't come from their different backgrounds or family disapproval. Something much bigger was waiting just around the corner, something that would test not just their love, but everything they thought they knew about each other. 3 months after the tense family meetings, Thomas's art career finally started taking off. A famous gallery owner had seen his work and offered him a chance to do his own show. Thomas spent weeks preparing new paintings, working late into the night while Amara brought him coffee and sandwiches. What Amara didn't know was that Thomas had a secret plan. Among his new paintings, he had created a special series, 7 paintings that told their love story. Each one captured a special moment. The first meeting at the charity event, the coffee shop conversation, the first kiss under the oak tree, and other precious memories. The opening night of the show arrived on a cool autumn evening. Thomas felt nervous, tugging at his new suit that Amara had insisted on buying him. The gallery was packed with art lovers, critics, and wealthy collectors. James and Victoria Washington stood near the entrance, looking uncomfortable but trying to be supportive for their daughter's sake. You'll do great, Amara whispered, straightening his tie. I'm so proud of you. The show started well. People loved Thomas's work, and several paintings sold within the first hour, but he kept watching the clock, waiting for the perfect moment. At exactly 9 o'clock, he nodded to the gallery owner, who announced it was time to reveal the special collection in the back room. As everyone moved to the new space, Thomas held Amara's hand tightly. The room was dark except for spotlights on each painting. When the lights came on, Amara gasped. There, on the walls, was their story told through Thomas's eyes. Thomas, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes as she recognized each moment. He led her slowly past each painting, watching as she took in every detail. The last painting was covered with a black cloth. When they reached it, Thomas's hands shook as he pulled the cloth away. The painting showed Amara as he saw her, beautiful, strong, and radiant. She was sitting in their favorite coffee shop, laughing at something. But on the table in the painting was a small black box. Amara turned to Thomas, her eyes wide, just as he got down on one knee. The whole room went silent. Amara Washington, he said, his voice trembling but clear. "You changed my life the moment you walked into that gallery. You saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and loved me despite all the reasons the world said you shouldn't." He pulled out a small box, not as fancy as the ones she was used to seeing, but containing a ring he had saved for months to buy. "I can't offer you a mansion or a luxury car, but I can promise you my heart, my loyalty, and a lifetime of real love. Will you marry me?" The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria Washington held her breath. James gripped his wife's hand tightly. Everyone waited for Amara's answer. Amara looked at the ring, then at the paintings telling their story, and finally into Thomas's eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." The room erupted in applause as Thomas slipped the ring on her finger and they kissed. Even James Washington was seen wiping away a tear, though he later denied it. But not everyone was celebrating. In the corner, Thomas's art dealer, Marcus, watched with a dark expression. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "It's happening," he whispered to someone. The Washington girl said yes, start the plan. Meanwhile, Thomas and Amara were lost in their own world of happiness. As photographers took pictures and people congratulated them, they held each other close, thinking this was the beginning of their happily ever after. "I love you," Amara whispered in Thomas's ear. "And I don't care what anyone thinks. This is the most romantic proposal ever." That night, as they celebrated with friends and family, neither of them noticed Marcus having intense conversations in dark corners, or the suspicious looks exchanged between some of the art collectors. They were too happy, too in love, to see the storm clouds gathering on their horizon. Their perfect moment would last exactly 3 more months, until their wedding day, when everything would change forever. The 3 months after the proposal passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Victoria Washington took charge, turning their simple wedding dreams into what she called the social event of the year. The guest list grew from 100 to 500 people, many of whom neither Thomas nor Amara had ever met. "Mom, we wanted something small," Amara protested one afternoon while looking at flower arrangements that cost more than Thomas's car. "Darling, you're a Washington," Victoria replied, waving her hand dismissively. "Small isn't in our vocabulary. Besides, your father's business partners expect to be invited." Thomas tried to stay out of the planning, feeling uncomfortable with the enormous amounts of money being spent. The wedding venue alone cost more than he made in 2 years, but he saw how torn Amara was between her parents' expectations and their original plans, so he supported whatever made her happy. One evening, as they sat in their apartment looking at wedding samples, Amara broke down crying. "I'm sorry, Thomas. This isn't what we wanted. The wedding's becoming a circus." Thomas held her close. "Hey, as long as you're the bride and I'm the groom, I don't care if we get married in a circus tent. Though your father might object to that venue choice," he joked, making her laugh through her tears. Meanwhile, strange things started happening at the art gallery. Marcus, Thomas's dealer, began acting mysteriously. He would have private meetings with people who didn't look like art buyers, and Thomas noticed some paintings being moved at odd hours. "Everything okay, Marcus?" Thomas asked one day after catching him on a suspicious phone call. "Never better," Marcus said too quickly. "In fact, I have great news. A wealthy collector wants to buy your entire collection right after the wedding. Think of it as a wedding gift." Thomas felt uneasy about the offer, but with wedding expenses piling up, he couldn't afford to be too suspicious. Even though Amara's parents were paying for most things, he wanted to contribute something to their new life together. The Washington family insisted on a luxury hotel for the ceremony and reception. As the wedding day approached, more and more expensive details were added: ice sculptures, rare flowers flown in from exotic locations, and a guest list that now included several celebrities and politicians. James Washington seemed to have accepted Thomas, but in his own way. "Son," he said during a wedding planning meeting, "I've arranged for you to have a proper studio after the wedding. Can't have my daughter's husband working from a garage." Thomas started to protest, but Amara squeezed his hand under the table. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, "but we'll discuss that after the honeymoon." 2 weeks before the wedding, Thomas noticed more unusual activities at the gallery. Late one night, he saw Marcus talking to 2 tough-looking men in suits. When they saw Thomas, they quickly left through the back door. "Just some new security measures," Marcus explained nervously. For your valuable paintings. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at an expensive restaurant, Thomas received a strange text from an unknown number. Hope you're ready for tomorrow's surprise. He showed it to Amara, who frowned. Probably just one of Daddy's friends trying to be funny. You know how they are with their mysterious business talk. That night, in their separate hotel rooms as tradition demanded, both Thomas and Amara felt nervous, but for different reasons. Amara worried about the massive wedding living up to everyone's expectations. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong at the gallery. Everything will be perfect tomorrow, Amara whispered to herself as she hung up her designer wedding dress. Just one more day, Thomas said to his reflection as he practiced his vows one last time. Neither of them knew that in a dark office across town, Marcus was frantically shredding documents and making phone calls. It all has to be ready before they say, I do. He hissed into his phone. The Washington girl and her artist won't know what hit them. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Thomas woke up early in his hotel room, excitement and nervousness making his stomach flutter. He checked his phone and found 20 missed calls from Marcus. Before he could call back, an email notification popped up from an anonymous address. Thomas's hands shook as he opened the email. Inside were dozens of documents and photos showing Marcus at the gallery, handling what looked like fake paintings. There were records of money transfers to offshore accounts, and worst of all, Thomas's signature forged on several documents. Oh God, no, Thomas whispered, scrolling through the evidence. The message at the bottom was clear. Sign over your entire collection to Marcus by noon, or these documents go to the police. You'll be arrested before you say, I do. His phone rang again. Marcus. This time Thomas answered. Look, kid, Marcus said quickly. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but I'm in trouble with some dangerous people. I needed to use your gallery for other business. Just sign the papers, and this all goes away. You can have your perfect wedding. Thomas felt sick. All those late-night meetings, the mysterious phone calls, the strange men in suits, it all made sense now. His gallery had been used for money laundering, and Marcus had made it look like Thomas was involved. In the next room, Amara was getting ready with her mother and bridesmaids. Her wedding dress cost more than a small house, and her hair and makeup team had been working for hours. She was happy but couldn't shake a strange feeling that something was wrong. Darling, you look perfect, Victoria said, adjusting Amara's veil. Just then, Amara's father burst into the room, his face pale. Everyone out. James Washington ordered. When they were alone with Amara, he turned to his daughter. Sweetheart, we have a problem. A big one. Daddy, what's wrong? Amara asked, her heart racing. The FBI just called me, James said, loosening his tie. They're on their way here. Someone leaked documents showing their regular transactions at my company. They're saying I've been moving money illegally for years. Victoria gasped. James, tell me this isn't true. But James Washington couldn't meet his wife's eyes. I did what I had to do to build our fortune, he whispered. To give you both the life you deserved. Amara felt her world spinning. The money for the wedding. My trust fund. It's all illegal, her father finished. I'm so sorry, baby girl. I never meant for this to come out today of all days. Meanwhile, Thomas paced in his room, trying to think. He could sign over his paintings to Marcus and save himself. That would mean being part of the criminal scheme. Or he could go to the police, but he might end up in jail on his wedding day. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara. Need to see you now. Emergency. Meet me in the hotel garden. Ignoring the old superstition about seeing the bride before the wedding, Thomas rushed to the garden. He found Amara sitting on a bench, still in her wedding dress but crying. Thomas. She ran to him. Everything's falling apart. My father. He's been running illegal businesses. The FBI is coming. Thomas held her tight, his own secret burning in his throat. Amara, I have to tell you something too. The gallery. Marcus has been using it for money laundering. He's threatening to frame me if I don't sign over my paintings. They stood there in the garden, their perfect wedding day crumbling around them. 500 guests were arriving, the cameras were being set up, and 2 different sets of federal agents were heading their way. What are we going to do? Amara whispered, mascara running down her cheeks. Before Thomas could answer, they heard sirens in the distance. Their time was running out. In just a few minutes, both their families' secrets would be exposed in front of everyone they knew. The perfect society wedding was about to become something very different indeed. The sound of sirens grew louder as Thomas and Amara stood in the hotel garden, still trying to process their shocking discoveries. Inside, guests were filling the grand ballroom, unaware of the drama about to unfold. 5 minutes until the ceremony. A wedding planner called out, rushing past the garden. She stopped, surprised to see the bride and groom together. Oh no, 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 it's bad luck to see each other before. She was interrupted by the screech of tires. 3 black FBI vehicles pulled up to the hotel entrance, followed by several police cars. Guests began murmuring as agents in dark suits entered the building. Marcus came running through the garden, out of breath. Sign these papers now. They're here. He thrust a folder of documents toward Thomas. At the same moment, James Washington appeared from another door. Amara, we need to leave. Now, there's a car waiting in the back. Freeze, FBI. Agents surrounded them from all sides, weapons drawn. The garden erupted into chaos. Guests began streaming out to watch, phones recording everything. Victoria Washington fainted dramatically, falling into the arms of a surprised waiter. Thomas Henderson, one agent, stepped forward. You're wanted for questioning about illegal activities at your art gallery. And James Washington, another agent, announced, you're under arrest for fraud and money laundering. Amara looked between her father and Thomas, her wedding dress now dirty at the hem from the garden. Her perfect day had turned into a nightmare. But as she watched Thomas's face, she saw something change in his expression. I won't sign, Thomas said firmly to Marcus, ripping up the papers. I'd rather go to jail than be part of your crimes. Marcus's face turned red with rage. You fool, you'll regret this. He tried to run but was quickly tackled by 2 agents. James Washington, however, remained calm. I can explain everything, he said smoothly, reaching for his phone. Just let me make one call to my lawyers. No, Daddy, Amara interrupted, her voice strong despite her tears. No more calls, no more fixes, no more pretending. The hotel had become a circus. News vans were arriving, reporters pushing through the crowd. Photographers who had been hired to capture the wedding were now taking very different pictures. Victoria had recovered from her faint and was arguing loudly with the agents about her designer handbag being searched. In the midst of the chaos, Thomas and Amara found each other's hands. I'm sorry, they both said at the same time, then couldn't help laughing despite everything. Mr. Henderson, an agent approached them. We've been investigating Marcus for months. We know you weren't involved in his scheme. You forged your signature on those documents. And Miss Washington, another agent added, while your father is under arrest, you're not implicated in his activities. Relief flooded through them, but the drama wasn't over. The wedding guests were demanding explanations. The press was shouting questions. Their families were being led away for questioning. What do we do about the wedding? The frantic wedding planner asked, clutching her clipboard. The minister is waiting. The food is ready. 500 people are here. Thomas looked at Amara, her makeup smeared and her expensive veil crooked. She had never looked more beautiful to him. It's your choice, he said softly. We can postpone, start over, do it differently. No, Amara interrupted, squeezing his hand. All these months of planning the perfect society wedding, trying to please everyone else. Maybe this is exactly what we needed. What do you mean? Amara smiled through her tears. The truth came out today, about your gallery, about my father's money. No more secrets, no more pretending. Let's get married right now, just as we are, real and honest. The guests watched in amazement as the bride and groom, instead of running away from their ruined wedding, walked hand in hand toward the minister. Behind them, the FBI continued their investigation. Marcus was being led away in handcuffs, and James Washington was reading his rights. But Thomas and Amara barely noticed. In the middle of the biggest scandal their city had seen in years, they were ready to say, I do. The wedding ceremony that followed was nothing like the one they had planned, but it was perfect in its own way. Half the guests had left when the FBI arrived, and the other half stood in stunned silence as Thomas and Amara exchanged their vows in the hotel garden. Gone were the elaborate flower arrangements and ice sculptures. Instead, there was just a tired-looking minister, a couple in love, and the setting sun painting the sky in beautiful colors. Amara's designer dress was dirty at the hem, and Thomas's suit jacket was wrinkled, but their smiles were more genuine than ever. "I think we need to rewrite our vows," Thomas said, holding Amara's hands. "The ones we prepared don't seem right anymore." Amara nodded, tears in her eyes. "Then speak from your heart." "Amara," Thomas began, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love you for who you are, not what you have. Today proved that money and status mean nothing. What matters is that you stood by me when everything fell apart. That's real love." Amara squeezed his hands. "Thomas, I promise to build a life with you based on truth and love. We don't need fancy parties or expensive things. We just need each other. Today showed me that you're the kind of man who chooses honesty over easy money, and that makes me love you even more." The minister, who had seen many weddings but never one quite like this, smiled warmly. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Their kiss was interrupted by applause from the remaining guests, mostly friends who had stuck around to support them. Even some of the FBI agents were wiping away tears. Later that evening, instead of having their expensive reception, Thomas and Amara sat in their favorite coffee shop, the same one where they had their first real conversation. They were still in their wedding clothes, causing quite a stir among the regular customers. "So," Thomas said, stirring his coffee, "what happens now? Your father's company. We'll have to survive without him," Amara finished. "I've already resigned from my position at the bank. I want to start fresh, do something meaningful." Thomas looked worried. "Are you sure? You loved your job." "I loved the work, not the lies," she said firmly. "Remember my dream about opening an art school for underprivileged kids? Maybe it's time to make that happen." Thomas smiled. "And I just got a call from the FBI. They're returning all my paintings. Seems Marcus was the only one involved in the money laundering. The gallery's reputation might take a hit, but we'll build it back up," Amara finished. "Honestly this time." 6 months later, their lives had changed completely. James Washington was serving time for his financial crimes, while Marcus had made a deal with prosecutors. Victoria Washington had moved to Europe to escape the scandal. But Thomas and Amara had never been happier. They sold the expensive apartment her parents had bought them and moved into a cozy house near their new art school. The Washington Henderson Arts Academy was already teaching 50 students, with Amara handling the business side while Thomas led art classes. One evening, as they walked home from the school, Amara stopped to watch the sunset. "Do you ever regret not having that big fancy wedding?" she asked. Thomas pulled her close. "Are you kidding? That crisis was the best thing that could have happened to us. It showed us what really matters." "And what's that?" she asked, smiling. "That true love isn't about perfect ceremonies or expensive rings. It's about choosing each other, especially when things get tough." They kissed as the sun set behind them, not caring that passing people stared at them. Their love story hadn't turned out the way anyone expected, but it had turned out exactly the way it should have. Back home, Thomas' latest painting hung over their fireplace. It showed their wedding day, complete with FBI agents and chaos. But with them in the center, smiling at each other as if nothing else mattered. Because in the end, nothing else did. The end.